Say hello, YouTube.
Can you wait? Welcome back to our tiny house.
We're going to be showing you a few of our ways that we like to cook with moose. Moose is our main meat. That's what we have in the freezer. That's what we use a lot of. And so we're always trying to find good ways to use it. Moose is super lean, which means
super
it's
healthy.
super healthy, but then it can be hard. It can be dry and hard to cook and keep tender and juicy.
Silas does most of the cooking in this relationship. He's a much better cook than I am, and so he does most of the cooking. If you want simple fare, I can cook it. If you want fancy stuff to taste good, Silas better cook it for you.
She's a good cook too.
Over the last couple days, he's been making some of our favorite meals, and we've been recording them, so we're gonna share some of those with you. Say, just cook it for me, I want to eat it.
All right, so here are a couple of our favorite ways to cook moose. First recipe we're going to be doing is just like a steak and broccoli. This is one of our favorites. It's something we do a variation of pretty often. What we put in the stir fry varies a lot. We don't always have the same ingredients. I usually use coconut aminos, which I don't have right now, and so I'll be doing more of a soy sauce base this time. But we do this with better cuts of meat. We obviously have a lot of ground moose, but when we have a nicer cut, a steak or something, then we like to slice it really thin and do something like this with it. So let's get started.
We've been trying to be better about soaking our rice and then rinsing it before we eat it. That helps with removal of arsenic, any dirt. It removes part of the starch on the rice and makes it easier to digest for your body as well. If we don't have time, if it's just I forget or it's a last minute dinner plan, then we'll just try and rinse the rice really good before we cook it.
So I'm just going to start by slicing the meat nice and thin. Obviously with game meat, one of the big things you're trying to deal with is to keep it nice and tender, and so slicing against the grain and nice thin strips. So this is just hoisin sauce, cornstarch, and a little bit of water. Sometimes I've been experimenting with putting some baking soda in to try and tenderize the meat a little more. But I'm pretty sure this is like backstrap. It feels nice and tender, so I'm not going to bother with that this time. And I'll just let this sit for a few minutes while I get everything else ready. So for my sauce, I'm doing a 1/4 cup of soy sauce. Normally I'd use coconut aminos, but I don't have that right now. And then as much garlic as you want, at least like 8 cloves. And then a tablespoon of oyster sauce. And about a teaspoon of ginger. Again, if you have fresh, that'd be great. A tablespoon of toasted sesame oil. And about a tablespoon of cornstarch. If I'm using coconut aminos, then I don't always add brown sugar, but I'm going to add just a little bit. And then 1/2 cup of whatever broth you have. This is moose broth that we made. I'm going to oil my wok and get it nice and hot. Make sure you get it nice and hot before you add the meat, and then you only want to add as much as fits in a single layer. Don't stir it too much as it cooks on the first side, and that will let it caramelize a little bit and get crispy. Depending on how much meat you have, you probably cook it in several batches. I did 3 batches for a little over a pound of meat.
We're eating steak and broccoli, and they're eating broccoli and salmon. They love salmon.
Once you're done with the meat, leave all the juices in the pan and add your broccoli and sauce and just simmer that covered until the broccoli is tender. You can add a little extra water if your sauce is getting too thick and the broccoli's not done yet. Once the broccoli is tender, just add your meat back in and warm it up a little bit if you need to, and you're done. It always seems like it's easy to come up with ideas when you have good cuts of meat, but we also end up with a ton of ground burger, and so we're always looking for ideas of what to do with moose burger. For a long time I've been trying to get a really good recipe for meatloaf because I really like meatloaf. Growing up I remember really only liking meatloaf when it was made with beef because it's just not the same when it's made with game meat. It's always dry and just doesn't have the flavor, and so I've been on a quest to find a good meatloaf recipe for game meat, and I've gotten it down now to where, you know, it isn't quite the same as beef, but I'm really happy with the way we make meatloaf. We do it probably once every other week or so we'll have meatloaf, and of course then the leftovers are great for sandwiches. So here's my recipe for moose meatloaf. I still tweak it a little bit sometimes, but these are the basics and should work for any game meat. But again, I'm looking for something. I don't like a lot of additives in my meatloaf. No celery. I don't like big chunks of onion. I want it to be mostly meat, and I want it to not be dry, and I want it to have flavor. So that's what I'm shooting for with these. Again, you also want it to be tender, and one of the ways to get that is by not over mixing the meat. So I'll mix all the other ingredients, and then I'll have kind of this slurry of wet ingredients, put the meat in and just mix it as little as I have to get everything incorporated, put it in a pan and bake it, and you'll get a nice tender meatloaf. So here we go. I'm starting with an egg, and then I go ahead and actually put ketchup in the mixture as well as on top later on. I'm eyeballing everything. We're going to go about a 1/4 cup. And we're going to do a tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce and a tablespoon of mustard. 1/2 cup of breadcrumbs. You can use whatever. We generally buy the Italian style. You can also make your own or just use plain, doesn't really matter. I'll sometimes grind oatmeal and use that for breadcrumbs. Then, I don't know, about 3/8 of a cup of milk, between 1/4 and 1/2, somewhere in there. 1/4 teaspoon of salt. About 1/2 teaspoon of pepper. And again, a lot of meatloaf will have chunks of onion in it. That's not terrible, but I've just been using onion powder, something like 1/2 teaspoon. Then I mix all of that. And then our last step is to add our meat in. Try and mix this just as little as possible. Sometimes I'll use my hands, but mix it just as little as you have to get it all incorporated. And I don't know, it's not really a big deal to grease your pan, I don't feel like, but I do sometimes. This is going to go in a 350-degree oven for 45 minutes, and then I'm going to put ketchup on top and cook it for the last 10 or 15 minutes. Of course, you can do whatever sides you want. We often do some sort of potatoes or a vegetable or both. And then the best part about meatloaf is having leftovers to do sandwiches with the next day. you're just looking for it to get to 160 degrees, it may take less time. Meatloaf is one of our go-tos for ground mousse. And again, since I've been able to get it a little more moist with a little more flavor, I'm not quite as loyal to beef when it comes to meatloaf. And then one of the other ways I like to do ground mousse sometimes is burgers. And burgers can be really tough with game meat. I really didn't like burgers with any game meat for a long time because they're so lean. They end up being really dry and not that great. So with mousse, I started doing like a smash burger technique. So you have a really hot griddle and you smash your ball of ground burger onto the hot griddle really thin, and then you can double it up with cheese. And so if you have, especially I'll do a little bit of oil on the skillet so the meat soaks up some of that oil, and then you're putting cheese on it as well. That helps with the dryness, and it makes a really, really good burger. If you do like a smash burger with ground beef, sometimes it's really too fatty. And so I've found it works really good with mousse. I'll occasionally do mousse burgers on the grill as well and do a thicker patty, and you just have to be careful to cook it a little more on the rare side to keep it a little moister. You can also stuff it and put more spices in just to kind of help compensate for the dryness. Even if you do cook it rare, it's drier than beef is going to be. That's just the way it is. We don't do burgers terribly often. I don't know why. Maybe we're trying to be healthy subconsciously, but I do really like a good burger every once in a while. Mousse is what we have, and so I've worked to come up with a way to make it almost as good as a burger you'd have anywhere, and still be nice and juicy and flavorful. And this is the way I like to do that. Asher is going to be helping me today, and we're going to start just by chopping all our toppings. And when we actually cook the burgers, they'll come off nice and hot and be ready to go on the buns with all the toppings. I do really like onions, but I'm not a big fan of a big chunk of raw onion on a burger. So I like to dice mine just a little bit and put a tablespoon or two on my burger. I make all our own mayonnaise. Super simple, highly recommend it. So much cheaper and better than store-bought mayonnaise. And I'm just going to put in some chipotles and adobo sauce into this to make our aioli. So again, I'm going to go pretty high heat. I want to get this skillet nice and hot. I'm going to do quite a bit of oil, just because we haven't had burgers in a while, so I'm gonna make sure they actually taste good. Yeah, I'm not trying to deep fry them or anything. This is just, I want to flash fry them really quick and have them soak up a little bit of that oil. So that's good and hot. I'm just gonna take small little balls. And then salt and pepper them. And they don't take long at all. And there's your patty. So you can just kind of stack as many as you want. This is just 2. Always got to remember to toast the buns. Nobody wants a cold bun. those are a few of our favorite ways to cook moose. We obviously are trying something new all the time. We do lots of different stuff, but those are a couple favorites
that are in constant rotation. Let us know your favorite ways to cook game meat below, and we'll see you next time.